Hi, I'm Sabrina Strings, and I'm here to talk to you about my first book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. Now, the main idea behind this book is that people often try to argue that fat phobia is at root about medical concerns, that somehow the populace of the Western world is just so concerned about so-called excess weight that they started to think through new ways to encourage people to lose weight for health reasons. That's simply not the case. In the Western world, fat phobia arose as a way to continue the justification of enslavement. Effectively, slavery had been going on for a couple hundred years. And then it became difficult to identify who should be slave and who should be free based on skin color, which is what they had been using. So they started to build up this new science called race science. And they were arguing, well, you know what? Being a Black person is not just about skin color, it's about your behavior. And one of the so-called behaviors of Black people is that we are prone to the animal appetites. We just get lost in sensuous pleasures like eating. And therefore, Black people are prone to be heavier. It was a way of connecting fatness and Blackness such that both could be denigrated at the same time. So uncovering this particular history was very important to me as a Black person because there's still so many aspects of race science that are covered up or little understood. I was inspired to write this book through conversations I had with my grandmother, who was always skeptical about why white women she would meet were on diets. And she had been experiencing this for decades. By the time I was old enough to catch wind of it. So in a way, this book was very much a way to continue the intellectual legacy of my ancestors. There was something there, some seed of this that had been niggling at my grandmother for so long. And finally, as a result of the deep love and admiration that I had for her, it became my question. So there's a way in which I like to say that my grandmother was the real sociologist in the family. As I was starting to research this particular question, I went immediately into the archives looking at women's magazines because that was what my committee advised me to do. And it was good advice. And almost immediately, I found that there was so much that was written about fatness, showing that it was evidence of low character and low racial standing, not to mention an unchristian attitude. There was so much of that in the archive. I was actually blown away. It only took someone who was interested in researching this to uncover it. It speaks to the way in which so many things in our past in the Western world is simply glossed over, hidden, covered up, because it makes people uncomfortable to think about where we've come from. But we're not going to get free if we're unwilling to think about where we've come from. This is why this kind of work is so important to me. Because while I was researching this, one of the most surprising aspects was that it wasn't just Black people, people who were obviously the descendants of Africans or were themselves still African, who were going to be decidedly discriminated against and stigmatized. It was also anyone who could not prove that they were of the purest, most elite white identities, those Anglo-Saxons. Now, of course, when I use the word pure, I'm being facetious. This is the term that they would have used to describe themselves. There's no reason for us to ever think that there has not always been plenty of inter-ethnic mixing since the world began. But that was part of the racial lore. That was part of the romance of whiteness, that no, there were a pure group of white people. And those people who might be impure, these hybrid whites, like these Irish people, and oh my gosh, these Italians, and don't start talking about the Russian Jews. There was such a tremendous fear of actual white persons that they thought were somehow Black people hiding in plain sight. That this was really one of the most eye-opening aspects of this, because it was a reminder, race science touches all of us in so many different and unseen ways. So it's important for all of us to be invested in eradicating racism. And that's one of the most important reasons why I try to remind people that you should be invested in fat liberation. All of us need to be invested in fat liberation. Fat phobia hurts fat people first and worst. But all of us are constantly being disciplined and being told to fear that we might become them and therefore be subject, supposedly justifiably, to discrimination, to hatred, to harassment. So until we are all free of this idea that our bodies must look a particular way to be healthy, then we all have to be invested in ending this type of discrimination. I wish more people were aware of the fact that concerns about fat liberation didn't just crop up with social media. They have been going on for a very, very long time. And in an organized way in the United States, they've been going on since the civil rights era. So I wish more people understood that the National Association for the Advancement of Fat Acceptance actually grew out of a social movement. So, in other words, people who are working with the NAAFA are not new to this. They have been doing this for decades. I wish more people could understand that questions about fat liberation are not new. People have been working on this for a very long time, but we're in an exciting period where there's a lot more energy, enthusiasm, and buy-in than ever. I'm going to take this opportunity now to read just a brief passage from my book. This is from the first chapter. Her name was Katarina. In her portrait, drawn in 1521, she wears a simple headdress with a single jewel in the center. Her youth is skillfully captured in the roundness and fullness of her cheeks. Her plump body is covered by an unadorned V-neck t-shirt and a modest high-collared frock. The entire effect is one of demure and unassuming beauty. Katarina's eyes are downcast, giving the 21-year-old an air of solemnity and gravity that might have seemed out of place were she not a slave. I begin here because it's a reminder that there are many different forms of beauty. Being plump, being full-figured, being fat, this is an obvious example of beauty. It's only in the aftermath of the tremendous ramp up of race science that people felt differently. Thank you so much for your time, and happy Fat Liberation Month to everyone.